Premier Wab Kinew says he's willing to entertain the Alberta to Ontario pipeline, but we want to know how you feel about it. The proposed Northern Shield pipeline would run from just outside Edmonton to refineries in southern Ontario, meaning it would also have to run through Manitoba to get to its intended destination. Initially, the Manitoba government refused to sign on to the project, but last week, Premier Wab Kinew saying that he would entertain the idea, adding that pipelines could make Canada stronger, and there are workers in our province who would be eager to help build it. So what do you think? Would you want a pipeline in your backyard? Perhaps you have more questions about the project, like our guest in our last half hour had talked about. Perhaps you have concerns about its economic viability, and maybe you're late to the idea and you like it. We'd like to hear from you. 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can text us as well. 204-588-7355. Eric Rader is a senior campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, and Eric's in studio. Welcome to the program. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for having me in today.
What did you think when you heard Wab Kinew was now open to this idea?
Yeah, I think that we've heard Premier Kinew not stand against fossil fuel expansion hard enough on a few different projects, looking at what's being proposed for Hudson Bay and Churchill and this plan. We also know that the push for this project is coming from Prime Minister Mark Carney, and basically he's bribing the premiers to spend federal money through his Build Canada Act and the Major Projects Office. That's the only way we can get federal funding into the province. And the reality is that we can't build more fossil fuel projects. And anybody who looks around at the weather and the disasters we've been dealing with for the last few years understands that.
You use the word bribe. And that's a pretty strong word. What makes you think that the Prime Minister is bribing provinces?
A specific way they pass through Bill C-5 and then the Build Canada Act and then the Major Projects Office, there's a finance component to it. And so I wrote a report about Prime Minister Mark Carney called Nature Can't Afford the Banker, and looked at the ways that he was not living up to the promise. He wrote a book about values, talked about climate change and the way corporations are supposed to uplift us. But what we're seeing specifically is if you want money, you have to go through the Major Projects Office, and those projects are primarily fossil fuel projects. So we know why premiers are getting in line, but I'm hoping that we're going to see Premier Kinew know that this just isn't our future.
He said last week the pipeline would need to be built in the right way, adding that Indigenous leaders need to be involved. When this project was first announced by the Alberta and Ontario Premier, we heard a lot of First Nations chief describe that they were blindsided by these announcements. What's your interpretation of all of this, in particular as an environmentalist?
We've been working on this for a long time. Canada signed on to the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Free, prior, and informed consent is the base standard for projects. That means communities can't be blindsided by it. They have to be brought to the table immediately at the start of it, and we're not seeing that. To Premier Kinew's credit, we saw him live in a news conference with Premier Daniel Smith, stopping her in her tracks when she was trying to dismiss Indigenous consent for a pipeline. So the words doing this in the right way, for working in Indigenous communities, doing things in a good way, these are synonymous for ensuring that Indigenous law and Indigenous values are upheld while these projects go forward. And I believe that Premier Kinew is signaling that he wants to ensure that that's the case for any project that goes forward.
You can text us as we continue this provincial conversation, 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. And Nancy sent us a message, and I'll read it to you. It says, quote, "It is sad and maddening that Canada is so fixated on oil and gas, including LNG. Our nation is backwards and short-sighted. We could be investing in a clean energy transition, but we aren't, and we and future generations are going to suffer." Let us know what you think. 204-780-0893 is our call-in phone number as well. Eric Rader is a senior campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, and he's in studio. Eric, you've been talking about this for a few years now. What sorts of concerns about this pipeline are obvious to you that you, I know, have talked about before?
Yeah, I mean, the very first time I started working on climate stuff was peat mining in 2012, but then oil by rail through Churchill in 2013. And At the time, we said that we couldn't build any more fossil fuel infrastructure, and we warned because the science was very clear about where we were going to get to and the disasters we were going to see. So fast forward 13 years, and I mean, at the time, quite often those concerns were dismissed because that was a future cast. We were thinking about things that our children, our grandchildren would deal with. But fast forward 13 years, and we saw 8% of the forests in Manitoba burn last year. We saw people die because of climate catastrophe. And the reality of the things we warned about 13 years ago still exists today. So the plans for folks from Alberta, for the oil and gas bros to move a product to try and sell us a good so they can make money, those aren't a Manitoba concern. That's not what we need to be worried about, is the flooding that we saw in western Manitoba or the 250 millimeters of rain that fell on, Stonewall and those regions earlier this year. We can't quite handle the level of disaster that's coming at us, and we definitely can't afford to pay for it right now. And everything we do to build more is going to be more of a problem. So this isn't even taking into account the problems with Indigenous consent and First Nations leadership, and it's not taking into account the problems of building a pipeline or an oil spill and trying to go build an LNG factory, a 1 kilometer long factory on Hudson Bay to move LNG through the port of Churchill and icebreakers. Like, there's all of these technical pieces, but the reality is 8 out of 10 people, like if you look around and 8 out of 10 people are sitting here and worried about climate change, but we're not talking about it. And that's, those are polling that has showed this. So the more we talk about it, the more people are going to realize that this isn't the Manitoba conversation about pipelines we should be having. We should be having a conversation about how do we keep our way of life? Like, we live outside, we go to the lake, we go fishing and we go cottaging, and that's who we are. And we can't do those things as disasters like flooding and fires continue to push us back. And the smoke warnings, so that the sporting events that we want to go to, we can't participate in. As a high school coach, I had to cancel an ultimate frisbee game this year because of a dust storm. Like, we're in a place that we warned about 13 years ago. We know it's here, and we know how to fix this, and fixing it isn't pipelines.
And yet you have folks like the Ontario Premier and the Alberta Premier saying that this is something that will be good for our economies. And you have those 2 out of the 10 people who see this as a pathway. What do you say to folks who might have an appreciation for what you're saying, but say, hey, we need this. This is going to this will help us economically.
Yeah, the affordability crisis, right? It's been top of mind. It's the top conversation we're having, gas tax cuts and those sort of things for the last couple of years. The affordability crisis is the climate crisis. There isn't a separation between the two, and expanding fossil fuels expands the climate crisis and makes things more unaffordable for us. So the future that we envision, having enough money so that we can travel or relax at the lake, we don't have enough money for that because the daily grind, the costs of living are going up. Like, the 40% increase in the price of coffee is only climate change. There's not anything else that accounts for that. It's not capitalism, it's not gouging, it's not, government inefficiencies. It's climate catastrophe pushing us in all of the ways and making it harder for us. And so anybody who says that this pipeline is an economic boon has to add up the cost of the climate catastrophe. Like the World Economic Forum, their number one problem over the next 10 years is the climate catastrophe, followed closely by global geopolitical instability, which we see south of our border, and the loss of biodiversity. Like, these are 2 of the 3 things that we've been talking to public, having community conversations about for 45 years. And now even the finance people recognize that, yep, this is the time. More parks, more protected areas, stop fossil fuels, act on climate now, because that's the only way that we support a society in the future.
How informed do you think the regular public is about this?
I think that we aren't having the conversation enough. I think there are people who are worried. They can see what's happening around them.
And when you say we're not having enough of the conversation, is there a specific part of the conversation that you're not seeing, or you're not seeing people demonstrate they have a fulsome appreciation of?
Yeah, just had a chance to go overseas, and I'm in Spain, and the side of the bus shelter, I mean, they have transportation, public transportation everywhere. So people know that we should be doing public transportation instead of burning individual cars on individual fossil fuels. But the side of the bus thing was, and it's in Spanish, but it was climate refuges. So it was places, because it hit 41 degrees in the town I was in. And other places know that there was times where they started building public infrastructure because that was going to be the solution, and they started wind farms and solar farms. We're really being limited by the disinformation from the oil and gas industry because we're an oil and gas country. And as soon as you get outside of that bubble, and as soon as you get outside of the influence of America, the rest of the world is moving, and we're stagnating, as one of the people who sent in a text.
Do you have one example of that disinformation that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, there's lots of court cases going on where they just tried to deny that the impacts, or, all the messaging around whether CO2 is good for us or CO2 is going to make plants grow. Like, we've got lots of the disinformation there. The understanding that is being put out in public, and so the lawsuits from different jurisdictions towards the oil and gas industry, they're pulling it out. It's court record now, so it's not something that we're just guessing at. But we watched we used to have an asbestos industry, right? And of course we don't have that anymore. And we used to smoke indoors, and people realized that all of those things are a problem. Well, we're going to get there on fossil fuels, and the solutions have been there for a long time. So that's where we're going to go with it.
What are you going to be watching for as the story develops here?
I think we're going to see Premier Kinew feel what his constituents are telling him from community members. I would suggest rural community members, and his own caucus. There's a climate caucus inside the government, and he's going to recognize that this time is calling for leadership. And we're not seeing it from Premier Smith and Premier Ford. Those are two of the worst premiers in the country, as polled by Angus Reid, and we're not seeing it from Prime Minister Mark Carney. So when we see him come out with an actual climate plan, because he's late on that, just as virtually every other premier is, when we see him come out with a climate plan, not just a strategy, and we'll start to see him step away from the oil and gas conversation to how we can build a better Manitoba within the constraints of nature and outside of fossil fuels. That's the place that we know he's going to get to, and it's a question of how long it's going to take him to get there.
Eric, thanks for coming in and for the time today.
Thank you.
Eric Rader is a senior campaigner for the Wilderness Committee.